Hello, my name is Guillermo Carrillo and I am an optometrist from Peru. And this year I am again grateful for the invitation to participate in this event of contact lens specialists from the Americas. And it is always important in a way to have a permanent update level regarding what is happening around visual correction. And this year we are going to delve a little deeper into the subject of astigmatism and what we have tried to investigate in recent months because it continues to be underestimated in some way, and despite the great options that we have. Now, we know that there are significant visual impairment and astigmatism is one of the most frequent or common. However, despite the fact that the images are scattered and somehow structured in a fusion to a cone shape, we have a vision that could eventually be, more or less, deficient. And in this scenario, patients who are not corrected or who have low or poorly corrected astigmatism will regularly have slight differences, and that will be significantly more noticeable in night conditions, and so the patient is not very conscious. For instance, we are talking about astigmatism of 0.25 to 0.5, the patient is not very aware of this difference, say in visual performance, unless introduced or shown to him. And when we talk about astigmatism, higher or more acute, when they are not corrected, it is definitely shown in the image, and we are going to have great vision deficiencies, and we are going to have great vision blurriness. However, this will generally depend on the spherical component that accompanies the astigmatism defect. We do not know that in any way a large part of refractive errors, although they will have an astigmatism component, will be accompanied by a spherical component, which will make a great difference in the visual result of each of the patients. And when we talk about the prescription of contact lenses for astigmatism, and in this study published in 2009 by Philip Morgan and Nathan Efron, an interesting investigation is made regarding what is the profile or what is the reality of patients who are corrected with astigmatism. And then we see in the graph that if we were correct, for example, to astigmatism patients with values that are above 0.75, as we would have 35, almost 35% chances are implemented. But if we go a little further to astigmatism correction values of less than 0.75, then what we are going to have is a significant increase in the amount of astigmatism corrections that we should make. So this gives us an important reference because it allows us in some way to try to understand what are the dynamics and the prevalence and then the incidence of astigmatism. Some years ago, in a community work that carried out an evaluation team of about 40,000 patients, we were able to establish a prevalence criterion. Let's say, in that the space of time we find that a large part of the patients, more than 50% of the patients had astigmatism. And when we evaluate their formulas, well over 68% had astigmatism from 0, 75 to more. If we extend this, let's say a generalization of this information, what we would have approximately is that of each patient that we evaluate, 3 or 4 present have astigmatism that can be corrected, which is an important factor because if we are offering the patient a quality of life criterion, then we need to properly correct their refractive errors. And another aspect that must also be consciously remembered is that when we correct an astigmatism patient with spherical equivalent formulas, as is very usual, what will happen regularly is that we will try to use the spherical equivalent as an element of compensation for the position of focal planes, with which this cone shape will produce that the resulting spherical value is located in the circle of at least confusion, and this leaves a cylinder that cannot be corrected as a remnant because the formula is spherical, and this value can definitely cause some kind of decrease in vision performance. Performance, from a quantitative point of view, the patient achieves 20/20 or a little better. But nevertheless, for certain specific tasks, the level of eye strain associated with these partial corrections can start to add up. And now, we know that this is much more significant in patients who could eventually have low astigmatisms, less significant in the way of correcting in patients with high astigmatism, because the higher astigmatism patient will also have a visual compromise from the astigmatic refractive defect. In this particular case, we have a cylinder or a residual mixed astigmatism of plus 0.50 with minus 1, because the patient originally had 3.50 myopia and the 1 diopter of astigmatism. And what we did to the spherical equivalent was to obtain 4 diopters of myopia. With minus 4 myopia, then finally we get this, that the patient in an over refraction has a refractive remnant of plus 0.50 with minus 1. And this, as we could visualize it in some way to transfer to the patients, is that when we correct, although in this image we have the result of the visual acuity, the patient is able to achieve 20 out of 20 when we correct it completely, the astigmatism, the sharpness and visual performance. Well, let's say significantly exceed what the patient achieves in a preliminary way. Then the comparatively, if I did it to the patient, the possibility is that he becomes aware of what would be the formula that he preferred, and I am completely sure that the patient would finally tell me that he wants to correct his astigmatism. We conducted the survey with 59 professionals around Peru to try and find out what they thought about the correction of astigmatism, how informed they are, how prepared, and what their professional management criteria is. And when we put some questions to try to basically involve those borderline astigmatisms, 0.75 as a cutoff point was added. And the idea was that if raised to them, that if we had a patient with minus 3.25 and 0.75 of astigmatism with a very good acuity of 20/15, what would be the best initial option that they would have to fit the contact lenses in this patient? And about 68% answered toric soft contact lenses for that case. And this means that at least in a conscious way or theoretical way, the professional is aware that astigmatism really must be corrected. And when we also asked why they decided on a contact lens that is soft for astigmatism, within the answers, relatively, they said cost of the lenses, and the cost option many times jumps as a main barrier for the adaptation of the contact lenses for astigmatism. We also asked them if offering the best optical correction to the patient was the best option for which they prescribed, and finally, if the references to the patient's question about astigmatism was what we took as a starting point of reference. However, 88% offering the ideal optical correction to the patient is the best option, so we see that in some way there is an awareness among professionals of the correction of astigmatism in an efficient way. Now, we also inquire about what happened with the refitting. What happens if the patient comes with a spherical equivalent currently used in his correction, and I need to offer him the option or present him with the option of toric soft contact lenses to have a better visual performance. And what happened was the following. We told the professionals what happens if your patient brings a minus 4 with a minus 1 to 0 degrees and achieves with that a 20 out of 20. The soft contact lens in use that the patient is wearing is a minus 4.25, a spherical equivalent, which achieves a visual acuity of 20/20, minus 1. Now let's say that the performance from the quantitative point of view of visual acuity is quite similar. However, the question or the focus of the question was directly associated with what we were doing to keep the patient wearing contact lenses. We told him to continue with the same correction, and we told him that he had to change it, basically to a toric soft lead contact lens. And we indicated the benefits to the patient so that this could be possible, and 68% responded that the benefits are the best option of inquiry. Now let's go back to the topic of spherical equivalence. That patient of minus 4 with minus 1 gives us a spherical equivalent of minus 4.5. And that minus 4.5 converted to the vertex that becomes minus 4.25. And that is the power of the lens that he is using. But what produces that result? It effectively produces a residual of mixed astigmatism that we will not be able to correct, because the spherical contact lens does not correct the astigmatism, and so we are going to have slight differences in visual performance. For many years, and some authors like Morgan, Efron, and others have done studies on what happens. How can we mask astigmatism with spherical contact lenses, especially in the particular case of low astigmatism, and that they found that vision is definitely always superior when astigmatism is completely corrected, despite the fact that visual acuity may look similar quantitatively for the patient, and the patient does not notice the refractive difference when we compensate in astigmatism. And an easy way to show it is to place the glasses with the residual spherocylindrical over refraction, so that the patient can compare which vision he wants to have, in such a way that we are showing him in some way the benefits directly. And another question we asked was regarding rotational stability, because we know that the contact lenses rotate, and although the contact lenses rotate and designs are currently very efficient, and rotation can basically be predicted. However, despite the fact that for many years we have all studied about how a contact lens rotates, what are the factors that induce rotation? Mainly the mechanism of blinking itself and the lens designs that are in some way to avoid this rotation. And in this particular case, if we found something anecdotal when the respondents were asked what was the basic stabilization principle of a soft contact lens for astigmatism, it was approximately 68%, and the numbers were repeating 68%, and you have a misconception of how to achieve stabilization from a theoretical contact lens. And they pointed out that in this case, the axis of astigmatism is the one that achieved stabilization. A small group, approximately 18%, understood that it is the principle of difference in thickness, or the old principle of the watermelon seed, which achieves stabilization. And another group thought that the refractive formula of glasses is the one that in some ways serves me for the design or the stabilization. So, we see that here, we somehow have a certain level of inconvenience, because there is no consistency between what is thought about why to fit under what conditions to fit, and what is the basic principle of fitting or stabilization of a contact lenses for astigmatism to achieve efficiency. And as designs go, to the extent that they are different in some way due to materials and designs themselves, they are the ones that are going to have certain characteristics that differentiate them in rotation predictability. And you also have to take something very into account. Not only is the design in isolation, as the design can be very stable, but we have additional components that could influence the rotation, which these are the tear viscosity itself, the blinking force itself, and the eyelid tension itself. And so I have to balance the options on what the industry tells me about their own designs and what I do clinically, which is why the idea of fitting with a trial lens what I clinically can basically find as a criterion of stability. So if I have a lens that the manufacturer reports is very stable, perfect. If I don't have to doubt that reference because it is made based on research and clinical studies. However, what I have to find is to really see if that design that I am fitting in this particular patient is going to be 100% stable, and for that I have to try a contact lens in the eye before finally saying if this is the lens that I am going to fit. But why? Because there are anatomical variations that will produce this type of possibility of risk of change in rotation. In addition to the position of the eyelids, the interaction that the eyelids make, the angles that the eyelids have anatomically, these can significantly influence stability. What we want is for the patient to be happy, and for him to be happy, with the correction formula that we have given to him, and for us to also feel satisfied with what we are doing. However, 60% of users are not happy with its visual quality, and this is a significant number. And we have to take into account, because in daily activities, if I use a form of correction, I permanently want to see well. So what barriers are there? Because we also asked questions regarding barriers. What barriers were found regarding the fitting of the contact lens? And is there a difficult analysis to be able to find? Because we have to put four elements of judgment together. On one hand, using basic knowledge, how confident did I feel professionally for my fitting? My query to make things fittings, and finally the range of options that we have. Because in Latin America there is a particular phenomenon. What happens is that many times professionals tell us that they do not fit contact lenses for astigmatism because the astigmatisms they see are much higher. However, we do not have this. So let's say exact figures of what is the prevalence of astigmatism and the distribution of these astigmatisms to be able to affirm this type of situation. So in this particular case, you have to do a pretty thorough analysis of what's going on. The students who are basically in training today, what do they require? Good basic knowledge on the one hand, and on the other hand, understanding of the economic aspect of a lens, which makes a difference, and what has more advantages, because it definitely does not weigh in the final decision of the patient. Deep down, at that level, I think it is not so important. However, if I put it on a scale and they tell the patient what would he prefer, to see well or see more or less, the patient will decide to see well, and there is the initial cost of the optical medical device, as it will not have a great relevance. And you have to have a fairly thorough analysis of what could be happening and what to do if you have to do more research on this topic with the students or with professionals, and how to transform education towards a more proactive condition in this profession. What we conclude on is that today it is easier than ever to fit contact lenses for astigmatism because the manufacturing is very good and the reproductibility and optical quality are also. 95% of the lenses in many cases do not require compensation nor change of correctional cylinder axis, and the designs are improved and they are more comfortable, and the materials are better, and finally have the parameter ranges that have been significantly expanded. Sure, if I have a +6 with a -7 at 40 degrees, it is definitely not something that I will find an easy option. But those corrections are strange, and they are rare, and if those are the patients that I have, well, I will have to look for other options. But under normal conditions, patients therefore oscillate between -0.75 and -2.25 at worst. And that's the wide range of options we have available. So definitely the patient who enters the consultation room does not enter thinking what is going to happen to him, that if he's going to be lucky today. So in some way, what we must do is correctly and properly go beyond the patient's expectations. Beyond, as the image is shown, this girl crossing her fingers to see if I'm going to obtain a benefit or not, but to satisfy in excess what I already thought. Really explain what the problem is, and she has to give the best possible correction to her visual and refractive problem, and be behind the fitting, because much of that success is in the management of the professional. Many thanks, and thank you for coming.